Well, thank you, Rosa. I think it's so very easy for all of you to understand that being a member of our council, he had to do this so we don't fire her from our council. But Your Excellency, the Archbishop Wensky, Reverend Father President of the University, distinguished members of staff, guests for this seminar, for this occasion, and all of you, my dear students, my brothers and sisters, I wish to thank you all very heartily for gathering for this occasion. I want to thank the university for the invitation that has brought me here. As just a small note of warning at the beginning, I did spend a little bit of time as a student working on theology in Albany, New York for 4 years. But that time did not suffice to take all the accent out of my English. So you know, if you still pick some accent, you know, you'll probably send me back to Albany. Your Excellencies, Archbishop Wensky, President Monsignor Cassel, Your Excellency, the Auxiliary Bishop of Miami, Rosa, and Father Chofi, and all of you, distinguished clergymen, members of staff. On behalf of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, we greet all of you and wish this session great success. Let me first thank for the invitation and congratulate the organizers of this important conference on climate, nature, and society. Yesterday, 3 distinguished speakers and 2 more today have explained to us many of the natural, social, economic, and political complexities of our topic. And I did get a taste of the discussion when I arrived here last night. And indeed, arriving here last night, I left the hall with a small, full piece of paper, summing up the discussions for me. I'm so delighted to contribute by focusing now on the encyclical Laudato Si of Pope Francis, but specifically, and I suppose by the request of the planners of this event, the way the encyclical challenges human social conscience. My dear friends, Pope Francis himself offers us the core message of Laudato Si in a very short, a minute and a half of presentation, a video clip, and I think that is also the best way to begin all of this. So let me invite you to just briefly see how Pope Francis himself presents the encyclical that is written. Just a minute and a half, very short.
Creyentes y no creyentes, estamos de acuerdo en que la tierra es una herencia común cuyos frutos deben beneficiar a todos. Sin embargo, ¿qué pasa en el mundo donde vivimos? La relación entre la pobreza y la fragilidad del planeta requiere otro modo de ejercer la economía y el progreso, concibiendo un nuevo estilo de vida. Porque necesitamos una conversión que nos una a todos, liberarnos de la esclavitud del consumismo. Y este mes te hago una petición especial. Que cuidemos de la creación recibida como un don que hay que cultivar y proteger para las generaciones futuras. Cuidar la casa común.
So that was Pope Francis presenting the main outlines of his encyclical. And here are some of the takeaways from the video on Laudato Si that we just saw. The Pope affirms that our nature is created by God and surrounded by the gifts of creation. Our failures are that we overconsume and that we do not share the gifts of creation. To use the biblical expression at the moment of creation, we'll probably say that we have tilled too much and we have kept too little, with dire consequences for the poor and for our planet. And so it is urgent that we change our sense of progress, our management of the economy, and our style of life. Pope Francis then seeks essentially to do three things in this encyclical. Here, this is the version from Rome. And the president just told me that all of you have read this twice and three times already. Not quite, huh? So my thing is to make you eager and curious to pick up the encyclical to read it. Now, in this encyclical, Pope Francis does essentially three things. He proposes a social teaching of the church that creates awareness about the immensity and the urgency of the challenge of the present situation of the world and of its poor. So if you want, as you heard him say, two fragilities, two elements which are fragile, which lie at the heart of Pope Francis' integral ecology. Fragilities, one, the earth and the way it is abused, and second, the poor ones in our midst and in our society. The second thing he does after drawing attention to this urgency of this challenge, he then addresses an urgent appeal for a new dialogue about how to shape the future of our planet, especially through an ecological conversion, an education in ecological citizenship, and an ethical and spiritual itinerary to reduce our footprint and reverse the deterioration of the natural and the social environment. And the third thing he does is he underpins this appeal with a profound faith and trust in humanity's ability to work together to build a common home. So urgency about the situation, appeal for doing something to change the situation, and a trust that we're able to do it. Because the Pope has a very deep sense of trust and belief in the ability of humanity. If even it does things wrong, there's still the ability to want to change things and do things for the better. So to make such change is going to require major shifts in our thinking and commitments. Indeed, a conversion of every individual and of groups and institutions at every level, from local to global, and all of us in humanity. So my remarks will explore several chapters of Laudato Si, but not in a way that we keep you here till midnight. So explore the chapters of Laudato Si, but with view to drawing attention to the crucial message of the need and the call for conversion, ecological conversion. So first is the question, what is happening, as you heard the Pope also say, what is happening to our common home? And we want to ask this question, as the first chapter of the encyclical does, about your home here in the state of Florida. Next, we shall examine integral ecology as the Pope proposes it as a solution to the message of his encyclical. And then this should lead us to the main features of ecological conversion as portrayed in the 6th chapter. And so after looking briefly then at how such conversion is played out in the United States, we conclude by reflecting on the role of the church and of a Catholic university like the University of St. Thomas. So this briefly is what I like to do this morning. So first, try to answer the question, what is happening to our common home? Secondly, see how Pope Francis proposes as a solution to this, the idea of an integral ecology. Ecology that is natural, but ecology that's also human and even social. And then bring this home, see what is happening here in the United States and here in the state of Florida. And then, as it were, see what we can probably suggest, to a university, Catholic university like St. Thomas, about what can be done. So first, what is happening to our common home? What is happening to our common home is the question with which Pope Francis begins the first chapter of his encyclical, Laudato Si. Humanity, he says, has been prone to irrational confidence in progress and human abilities. But now, people are more sensitive to the environment and the need to protect nature, along with the growing concern, both genuine and distressing, for what is happening to our planet. And what about the troubling situation here in Florida? The reason for asking is not to amass information or to satisfy curiosity, but rather to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what is happening to the world into our own personal suffering, and thus to discover what each of us can do about the situation. This is very significant, knowing that there'll be questions after this, right? There'll be questions? No? Questions and answers after this? Okay. But still needing to be brief, I will cut down my asides. We can do that almost on every page. But the point is very crucial. Pope Francis invites us to feel the pain of the earth, the planet, and the pain of the poor. And so feeling the pain with them, to resolve, to change. So he calls us to a certain amount of compassion. Compassion with the two fragilities we talked about, what is happening to the earth, our home, and what is happening to the poor ones in our midst. And so not simply to gather information about these features, but to bring this information home as an experience of compassion, a reaction to the suffering of the poor and the suffering state of our planet. We don't want to be biblical, otherwise you'd just have to turn the pages of the Bible and look at Isaiah chapter 24, which says that the earth languishes from the sins of a human person. So our sins do impact on the earth, and the earth suffers as a result of our own sinfulness and the way we treat the environment. So please notice then the steps to see, to make the suffering our own, and so to act. And so quoting the U.S. government's National Climate Assessment, a recent National Geographic predicts that Florida will be battered in the coming decades by rising seas and by extreme weather. For example, the huge agricultural industry, heat and drought in the dry season could undermine the three mainstays of Florida's farming, namely tomatoes, sugarcane, and citrus. The rainy season will be stormier, according to this article in the National Geographic, with fiercer hurricanes and higher storm surges. And so with these worries, more and more businesses and local officials are factoring climate change into their decisions about the future. They focused on adapting to severe weather and flooding, which is already occurring as seas rise. Similarly, a recent article in the New Yorker called The Siege of Miami reports that in the Miami area, for the past several years, the daily high water mark has been racing up at the rate of almost an inch a year, nearly 10 times the rate of average global sea level rise. So while those in coastline mansions have the money to move if needed, the West suffering will hit the poorest areas where residents are barely getting by and will not have the opportunity or the means to move and to get out of the way of these dangers. They are likely to lose their homes and livelihoods and become internally displaced. And so, if Laudato Si may first have given the impression of talking about the Amazon rainforest or even about some desertification in Africa and Asia, we now realize that the encyclical is also about the endangered shorelines of Miami Beach. And just yesterday, talking in Malloy College and Rockville Center, we have people also say that every now and then they have to pump water from their basements because the seawater is also getting into basements of people. So Laudato Si is not about something so distant from us. It's not about the Amazon rainforest alone. Neither is it about the Sahara Desert and how it's creeping down, or some other desert areas in Asia or whatever. It is about something that is so very close to us all. If what the National Geographic and the New Yorker say, if these are true, then here in Florida we make an experience of the impact of these climate-related disasters. So the endangered situation is with us. It is an account of this experience that Pope Francis suggests and talks about integral ecology. Not only about the rising sea levels, but about the poor who will be chased out of their homes and probably not have any place to go to. The encyclical proposes an approach to ecology which respects our unique place as human beings in the world and our relationship to our surroundings. This is integral ecology, human and natural. This has had a long history in the teaching of the popes of the church. If you want to look at it like when Leo XIII first developed the first encyclical on social issues and talked about the impact of the Industrial Revolution on the world, he already then talked about nature. But it was Paul VI in the 1960s who drew our attention to the great ecological question. And John Paul II, coming after him, will develop this great ecological question as human and natural ecology. Then Pope Benedict XVI, coming after John Paul II, will take up the two, natural human ecology, and expand it further into social ecology and even ecology of peace. So Francis is an heir to all of these developments of the concept of ecology. So when he proposes integral ecology, he's bringing all of these together. Everything that affects our world and everything that affects human beings, us living on this planet. So integral ecology, then, this integration is the opposite of fragmentation and isolation. Nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves or as a mere setting in which we live. Indeed, it was Pope Benedict who says that the book of nature is one. It's both human and it's also nature. But it is essentially one book of nature. And so rather than think of our relationship with the natural environment as separate from other spheres of human interest and activity, let us see nature as an integral part of a greater whole, which includes the social, political, spiritual, material, and even the economic good and sphere in which we're involved. After all, our bodies are taken from the earth, and it is sustained by products of the earth. It is sustained by the air we breathe, and if everything goes foul, is that. So we are part of nature, and it is nature that supports and sustains our lives, and we live because nature sustains us. So the strength of Pope Francis's integral ecology helps us see all of this and how they all come together. St. Francis of Assisi shows us just how inseparable is the bond between concerns for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. He is the example par excellence of care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology lived out joyfully and authentically. So our integration with the universe is inbuilt. We ourselves are dust out of the earth. Our very bodies are made from her elements. We breathe her air, and we receive life and refreshment from her waters. So we're part of nature, included in it, and thus in constant interaction with it. So from conception to the moment of death, the life of every person is integrated and sustained by the awesome panoply of natural processes. Humanity then must reciprocate. We must nourish and sustain the earth that nourishes and sustains us. We cannot abusively then treat our earth or discard it. The biblical narrative teaches us that human life is grounded in three fundamental and closely intertwined relationships: with God, with one another, and with the earth. And when one of these relationships is broken, then the others are broken too. And our insertion in the universe is no longer integral. It is fractured, and it becomes partial. I am resisting another eyesight over here, and I'm going to go right on. You know, we Christians, is so very, usual that we talk about justification, we talk about justice. But in the Bible, the first meaning of justice is not doing to something what somebody else has done to you. The first meaning of justice in the Bible is to respect the demands of the relationship in which you live. When you respect the demands of the relationship in which you live, you are just. And when you disregard the demands of the relationship in which you live, you are unjust. So our justice is first and foremost towards God. When we respect the demands of the relationship between us and God. And then from that we come to one another, and then ultimately also to nature. So justice is a very crucial component of this talk about integral ecology. When we respect the demands of the relationships in which we live, with God, with one another, and with the earth. And so everything then is closely interrelated, says the Holy Father, and today's problem calls for a vision capable of taking into account every aspect of the global crisis. When we embrace integral ecology, we avoid silo thinking in favor of interconnection and holism. Only interconnection will let us find adequate ways of solving the more complex problems of today's world, particularly those regarding the environment and the poor. These problems cannot be dealt with from a single perspective or from a single set of interests. No branch of science, no form of wisdom, including culture, religion, and spirituality, should be neglected. Today, the analysis of environmental problems cannot be separated from the analysis of human, family, work-related, and even urban contexts, and how individuals relate to themselves. So building on all of this core ideas of Pope Francis, he goes on to explore integral ecology in several areas of application, notably the common good and justice. In the contemporary world, where injustices abound and growing numbers of people are deprived of basic human rights and considered expendable, working for common good means to make choices in solidarity based on preferential option for the poor. We must not forget the poor of today, whose life on this earth is brief and who cannot keep waiting. The common good also regards future generations. We can no longer speak of sustainable development apart from intergenerational solidarity. Here, in the context of integral ecology, Pope Francis invokes care for our children to formulate his pivotal question about the environment, namely, what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up and those who are yet to be born? This is the core of what he refers to as the intergenerational solidarity. We need to show solidarity with those coming after us, just as we did with those who went before us. Here is how these ideas then can come together and also apply to business. Clearly, corporations must acknowledge the earth's finite resources and respect our shared common goods. Companies must account for all externalities, measure their footprints on the planet, and restore harmony to the environment for future generations. So where profit alone counts, there can be no thinking about the rhythms of nature, its phases of decay and regeneration, or the complexity of our ecosystem, which may be gravely upset by human intervention. There is more to business than financial profit and loss. And so, if this may be useful for people in business, at the beginning of this year, we were invited to Chile, South America, to a seminar of business leaders and CEOs of corporations. And what they wanted to consider was not the role of business in society. What they wanted to consider was rather the role of business for society. These corporate leaders of corporations have come together to see their role of business for society and what businesses can do for society, for its growth, and for its sustenance. So with all of this then, briefly, let us then look at what the Holy Father teaches about, our own response to all these problems. So there is his message about ecological conversion. So integral ecology, rather than fragmented exploitation and conservation, is key to assuring a more healthy world for our children. Pope Francis calls next for ecological conversion, an expression which was already introduced by Pope John Paul II in his encyclical Sollicitude Rei Socialis, and later on developed in another writing of his called Centesimus Annus. Ecological conversion means that the effects of people's encounter with Jesus become evident in their relationship with the world around them. It just means that our own relationship with God affects how we also relate to and treat the things around us. And so, living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. For certain mindsets really do influence our behavior. And so the external deserts in the world are growing. And according to Pope Francis, this is because the internal deserts in our hearts are also growing. So there is a strict correlation between our own spiritualities and our own treatment of the environment and the world outside us. Our conscience then is the seat and home of this conversion. So let us care for our common home and let us care for our consciences. But the care of our common home, as Pope Francis sees it, can never be achieved by individual initiatives or even by the united effort of men bred in an individualistic way. It calls for a union of skills and a unity of achievement that can only grow from a quiet and a different attitude. So social problems must be addressed by community networks and not simply by the sum of individual good ideas, which means that for Pope Francis, ecological conversion is not simply something of an individual, but it also becomes community conversion. And because it becomes community conversion, it must be undergirded by a very sound and profound spirituality. And so, Pope Francis recognizes that a commitment to this lofty idea cannot be sustained by mere doctrine. It must be sustained also by a spirituality, that interior impulse that encourages, that motivates, that nourishes, and gives meaning to our individual and communal activities. Therefore, alongside ecological conversion, Pope Francis recommends also ecological spirituality. So, by way of summing it all up, ecological conversion calls us to embrace integral ecology and to understand it, to believe in it, and to act upon it. This will not happen automatically. Our habits run counter to integral ecology, but we can transform ourselves. We can experience ecological conversion. And so in the final chapter of the encyclical, this is what the Pope talks about: Christian spirituality and an education in ecological citizenship. So it just doesn't happen. There must be an education in ecological citizenship. And this is the one thing that several institutions, easily embrace and accept to do, to educate in ecological citizenship. So people are sensitive about their own ecological roles and responsibility. With this, then, the Pope urges us, each and every one, individuals, families, local communities, nations, and international community, to ecological conversion, to a change of heart and a change of direction, where we take on the beauty and the responsibility of caring for our common home. Let us then return to an ancient wisdom, still enunciated and practiced by some indigenous people, that everything is interconnected. The human and natural facets of the environment should never have been opposed to each other. The interconnection between them should always have been upheld. And that's why Pope Francis urges Christians especially to be leaven for the renewal of humanity, articulate ideals, demonstrate the motivation to act, and become models of generosity and sharing. To be such a leaven, Christians need to call on the rich heritage of 20 centuries of faith and spirituality. That's what we have. If our religion goes back to Christ, so 2,000 years back, then we have the experience of all of these years to teach us how to practice and live our faith, a spirituality that is capable of inspiring us, providing an interior impulse and encouraging us to embrace action in support of and appreciation for everything that God has created. So let me suggest a couple of attitudes that can accompany us and become manifestations of this. Gratitude for God's gratuitous gift of the world is very basic. From this, we know that we are called quietly to imitate his generosity in self-sacrifice and good works. Secondly, integral awareness, a loving awareness that we're not disconnected from the rest of creation, but joined in a very splendid and universal communion. And so as believers, we do not look at the world from without, but from within, conscious of the bonds with which the Father has linked us to all beings. Third, there must be the turn of compassion, which we celebrate this year, especially in this Jubilee Year of Mercy. Alan Farrago, president of Friends of the Everglades, so it's a name that you must know better here than I do. He wrote beautifully this expression: the best way to face massive uncertainties on the climate is with an open heart and empathy for our neighbors who are less well off and less secure than we are, even here in Miami. Then we go on to recognize that there must also be a deep respect for each creature's value. Each creature reflects something of God and has a message to convey to us. And the security that Christ has taken onto himself, this material world, and now risen, is intimately present to each being, surrounding it with his affection and penetrating it with its light. In some, it's saying that for us, Christians and Catholics, our relationship towards the environment and begins with creation. But we know that creation leads us to incarnation. And so everything that we think about in creation must go on and find fulfillment in incarnation, in Jesus coming to take the substance of this earth, raising it up, glorifying it with the Father. And so this should lead us ultimately to have a sense of awe for the intrinsic order and perfect dynamism with which God created everything. In the gospel, Jesus says of the birds of the air that none of them is forgotten before God. How then can we possibly mistreat them or cause them harm? So, let us now look at how ecological and communal conversion is played out at the national level as we consider how, in the light of Laudato Si', the United States is responding to the great challenge of the climate. Last March, the United States submitted its intended national determined contribution, the famous INDC, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In that document, the U.S. expressed its strong commitment to reducing greenhouse gas pollution, and it set an economy-wide target of reducing its greenhouse emission by 26 to 28%, below its 2005 level in 2025, and to make best effort to reduce its emission by 28%. And it called this target fair and ambitious. And so, when Pope Francis arrived in the United States in September, his first public words delivered at the White House included the following: Mr. President, I find it encouraging that you are proposing an initiative for reducing air pollution. Accepting the urgency, it seems clear to me also that climate change is a problem which can no longer be left to our future generations. When it comes to the care of our common home, we are living at a critical moment of history, and we still have time to make the necessary changes needed for a sustainable and integral development. In December then in 2015, the nations, as you know, gathered in Paris in the famous COP21 meeting, promising to peak global greenhouse gas emission as soon as possible with the goal of reaching net zero emissions in the second half of this century. This goal requires, as Pope Francis urged in Laudato Si', a new and a universal solidarity. The United States, as one of the world's largest carbon emitters, especially in per capita terms, has a special responsibility in this. And the U.S. has exercised leadership in the run-up to Paris, as evidenced by bilateral agreements with both India and China. And so, building on its own 26 to 28% commitment, leadership was also shown during the negotiations in Paris at the COP21 meeting. Yet, as Pope Francis realistically warns, economic and other special interests can easily end up trumping the common good and manipulating information so that their own plans will not be affected. With a certain amount of temerity, then, I go to make this other observation. Therefore, for us in our office, it was interesting that we read in the newspapers the Supreme Court recent decision to stay the implementation of the administration's Clean Power Plan to reduce emission from power plants. We thought that this was in consonance with the INDC of the United States, presented at the COP21. So let me only comment that greenhouse gas pollution affects every man. This is something that we know. Climatic condition can never be contained in a single territory. Whatever happens to the atmosphere becomes a global issue, and it goes all over. And so, whether it is in some place in Africa, or East Asia, or United States, it becomes a global issue for all of us to show interest in. And so, the great majority of Americans fully support plans to reduce global emission and to protect our common home. Let's therefore make sure that the dynamic set in motion by COP21 can be realized and achieved. So, my dear friends, by way of concluding then, let me observe that guided by Laudato Si, we have reviewed the environment in this country and state. We've sensitized ourselves to integral rather than fragmented ecology and seen its implication in ecological conversion. Conversion is a part of return to the Father from whom we have strayed by sin. Sin is the active principle of division. And so St. John Paul II wrote, only conversion from sin is capable of bringing us back and to a profound and lasting relationship with one another and with our world. Such a first step requires a recognition of our own sin, followed by heartfelt repentance and a desire to change. And so for 20 centuries, the church has accompanied the daily effort of conversion of hearts. It accompanies each sinner in turning back to the fundamental and full reconciliation of humanity carried out by redemption. Today, the church fulfills the same role with regard to humanity. It now touches in a special way on the fourth division produced by sin, identified by St. John Paul II, that between humanity and nature created by God, we must also fashion reconciliation. So Pope Francis speaks to Christians and non-Christians alike, the religious and non-religious. He appeals for dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet, a dialogue that is open to everyone, a dialogue which science and religion can come together to embrace, and as the Archdiocesan Catholic University St. Thomas is committed to developing leadership in justice, science, business, and ministry, I wish to recommend a prayer with which the Holy Father concludes his reflection, but most importantly also to draw attention to what your own chief pastor has written and said. You know what the bishop has written and said, right? You read all his pastoral letters? Oh, yeah? He wrote to the U.S. senators these words a short while ago. The U.S. bishops have long spoken out on the importance of prudent action to address the growing impact of global climate change. In the past, we expressed support for a national carbon standard and offered more moral principles to guide the EPA and states as they take steps to reduce carbon pollution. Among these principles are care for human life and all of creation, social and economic justice, including equitable distribution of costs and assistance to impression that might be sustained. And it is to this that we invite all and turn our attention, and may the Lord support our venture. So this morning at St. Thomas University, we commend you all in your efforts to bring science, religion, and faith to the solution to end global warming and to control everything that is happening. And we hope that we can recognize and always keep this fact in mind. God gave us the earth as a garden. We have no right to pass it on as a wilderness. I want to thank you for your attention, and may God sustain you.